Good afternoon. My name is Paul Merrill. I'm a graduating 2012 MARC 1. I would like to welcome everyone to the 2012 GSD Class Day Lecture. This year we are honored to have Bruce Mau, founder of Bruce Mau Design and the Massive Change Network, as our speaker. Mr. Mau's career has spanned for over 30 years. He was the recipient of the American Institute of Graphic Arts Medal in 2007, an honor given to individuals in recognition of their exceptional achievements, services, or other contributions to the field of graphic design and visual communication. Also, he founded the Institute Without Boundaries in 2002 as a postgraduate program that seeks to achieve social, ecological, and economic innovation. The Institute's first project was an exhibition titled Massive Change, which led to a publication and the establishment of the Massive Change Network that focuses on the power and possibilities of design. Additionally, Bruce Mau Design has worked with Coca-Cola to establish a cohesive long-term vision to guide the company's future, sustainability, business, and culture through the Live Positively program. Mr. Mau was featured as the expert on sustainability design in the 11th Hour, a full-length feature documentary film, which his firm also designed and produced titles, credits, and animated information graphics. Furthermore, he has co-authored a book, The Third Teacher, which puts forward 79 ways in which schools designed today can be ready for tomorrow's world. The book examines the relationship between the physical environments in which kids learn and the knowledge, insights, abilities, and joys they gain. His Incomplete Manifesto for Growth, first written in 1998 as an outline for his beliefs, strategies, and motivations that guide his own firm, has become a guide for others to use their creativity as a means to make a positive impact on the world. Mr. Mau's career is evidence of his commitment to and the understanding of the design profession. The work of his firm and the Institute Without Boundaries addresses one of the most important aspects that is often overlooked by designers. The fact that as designers, we are responsible for searching and confronting the problems of the world, while at the same time we have the ability and obligation to fix them. On behalf of the 2012 graduating class, please help me in welcoming Bruce Mau.
Thank you. I'm really thrilled to be here. My heart's pounding. I got some jokes to tell you, which always makes me nervous. I'm here to talk to you about the power you now have as designers, the power of design, the power to analyze and create, to visualize the future, to shape the world, to provide leadership, to design. I want to explore what that power can mean and what you can accomplish with your power. I'll address the responsibility that comes with it and the urgent need I have for your help, the urgent need that the world has for your talent and energy and power to design. Now, everyone making a Class Day speech, I'm assuming, starts with, "I'm honored to be here." I'm also honored to be here, deeply honored. I want to thank the students for inviting me here and congratulate all of you and your parents on this extraordinary achievement, and also to recognize Dean Mustafa V. and Dean of Students, Laura Souden. But I'm really thrilled to be here, besides being honored. It's quite different. You can't possibly know how thrilled I am, partly because I'm Canadian and this is what a Canadian looks like when they're super excited. But mostly because my story of getting here is almost unbelievable, and I'm going to share some of that with you, and for the most part, unknown. For most of my life, I was embarrassed by this story. Only recently I've realized how important it can be to others. I grew up outside of mining town, 6 hours north of Toronto. That far north, the temperature was minus 40 for weeks on end. In the dead of winter, the men went a mile down into the earth in the darkness and at the end of their shift, came out again in the darkness. They wouldn't see sunlight for days and weeks at a time. There was some pretty strange behavior. Alcoholism was rampant, violence was off the charts, divorce was epidemic. All the furniture in the local hotel, as the bar was called, was bolted down. Otherwise, the men would bust it up and bust up each other. There were 3 local pastimes besides hunting. They were hockey, drinking, and fighting. And there's a famous Canadian song about doing all 3 at once. In fact, my own father was a violent alcoholic who physically abused his wife and family for almost 20 years. One night, everything changed for me. And I'm going to tell this story because it's one of my favorite architectural stories. My father came home after the bars had closed with a man named Pepper Martin. Pepper looked like he sounded, wily, wiry, and tough. The 2 men proceeded to drink bottles of whiskey and play cards to the blasting refrain of Patsy Cline and Hank Snow on the hi-fi till the early hours of the morning, oblivious to the fact that the whole house was awakened by this. Now, Pepper Martin lived only a few houses away in our subdivision, in a classic suburban bungalow just like ours. Nonetheless, my father was quite surprised when Pepper announced that he was going to bed, and it was time for my father to go home. My father explained that Pepper was his guest, and that it was Pepper who would have to leave. Pepper looked around in his drunken haze and saw a house that looked pretty much like his own, and reasserted that no, there's no way that he, Pepper Martin, was going to be thrown out of his own house. It was my father who was going to have to go. The sprawling, sloppy, ugly brawl that ensued as my father tried to force Pepper Martin out of our house and into his car in the driveway was a low point of a life at the bottom. I mean, the fact that the idea was to get him into the car when he was... I watched as the 2 men crashed through the glass of our screen door, and both were bloodied and wounded. That night, without knowing how, or even how to think about how, I determined that I would live differently. I had no idea how to do it. We had no books in our house. My parents did not own books. I can't hardly imagine a life without books now. I'd never heard the word design. That night I decided that I would dedicate myself to creating a different way of life. A life in a different place, a different way of being in the world, a life against violence, a life of beauty and ideas and books and art. I was 12. Fortunately for me, the 60s happened. The civil rights movement and women's liberation happened, and way up there in northern Canada, my mother finally found the liberty and strength to gather her 5 children and leave her husband. We moved to a farm in the wilderness, the last farm on a 5-mile dirt road into the Canadian Shield. The forest beyond our house opened onto thousands of miles of crown land. I only realized this recently when I Googled my home and discovered there was nothing there. You could see Russia from my porch. Next stop, Moscow, Soviet Union. Our farmhouse was built on a rock. And in the coldest winter months, there was no way to get running water into the house. The house was heated with a wood stove. In the winter, I would wake up to tiny snowdrifts on the floor of my attic room. My job as a young man was to provide the house with water from the well in the valley. Every day, I drove a snowmobile down into the valley and back up with drums of fresh water. This is an experience that I share with 12% of the world. 12% of the world does not have access to clean water, and I am shocked every time I think about this that I am in the room with someone who had this experience. That someone in this room grew up without access to running water. But I loved it. I loved it there. Things were looking up. That's right. After knowing only random explosive violence, freedom and a good night's sleep were a treasure. Now you know the secret of my famous optimism. I went out into the forest and I learned how to hunt. We grew crops for food and we raised animals. I had a trap line that I checked every morning before going to school. I learned how to butcher. I'm one of the few designers that can put a pig or a moose into the freezer if you need to. Our farming community was an unregulated place where people did what they needed to do. If you needed a building, you built it. We built houses and barns and outbuildings. There were no designers or architects. No one ever got a permit or a license for anything, as I can remember. We had total freedom to solve problems. We did the best we could. That process of relying on your wits and constantly solving problems is central to my way of thinking and working and designing. I realize now that the experience of life in the wilderness, life on the farm, was critical to my creative development and my success as an entrepreneurial designer. I learned about the cycles of life. I learned what it takes to have food for your family. I learned hard work. I learned free thinking. I learned to rely on myself and others and to organize things. My wife grew up in Winnipeg, and her mother had very rigorous programs for the girls. I sometimes joke that we only had one program. It was "You Kids Get Outside." There was also an afternoon program, which was "I Thought I Told You to Get Outside." I went to high school. Probably like most of you, I was a strange kid. As I got older, I didn't like hunting. That's how you get to be here. As I got older, I didn't like hunting and hockey. In Canada, that would be like a Swiss boy not liking chocolate and cuckoo clocks, or an American boy not liking guns and football. Instead, I loved drawing and photography and television. We had a tiny black and white TV, and on that screen, I discovered the world that I imagined might exist. We had 2 channels, French and English. I saw a man walk on the moon. I saw Bugs Bunny at the opening of the show. I would get behind the TV and march into the space with all the other characters. I saw the wonderful world of Disney and his vision for a creative enterprise. But the most important thing I discovered on that flickering screen was the city. I saw Toronto and other amazing cities. Cities that I wanted to live in and experience. To get to high school every day, I had to travel 30 miles by bus through a dead zone. For 30 miles around the toxic mining and smelting facilities, the sulfuric pollution had turned everything black. Not a blade of grass grew. For 30 miles in every direction, the landscape was rock and dust, black and gray. What was really tragic is that each rock, if you turned it over, was pink granite. It was like pink quartz and pink granite. I mean, absolutely beautiful. But the entire place was black. You could see it from space. When NASA wanted to teach astronauts how to drive their car on the moon, they brought them to my hometown because it was the closest thing on the planet to the desolate, lifeless surface of the moon. The most amazing thing about the dead zone was that nobody mentioned it. Not once. Not once did someone say, "Holy cow, 30 miles of death. What the hell happened here?" No. We just sat on the bus and read or chatted as if it was perfectly normal to drive to school through 30 miles of chemical desert. I learned the power of the norm and how capable we are of adapting to even the most extreme conditions. As I approached the end of high school, my love of drawing and photography eventually overwhelmed all my other interests. I stopped hockey and shooting animals and started drawing and photographing them. I decided at the last moment to apply to art school, even though I hadn't ever met an artist or anyone who had gone to art school, and no one in my family had ever gone to college. I went to the guidance office and declared my true love. During my high school years, I had studied science and math to the exclusion of almost everything else. I had a job in the school as a lab technician, see also nerd. But now I wanted to go to art school. "It's too late," was the response. "I'm 16 years old. It can't be too late." My fate cannot be sealed. Other people must have the problem that I do. That was my first big design idea. If you have a problem, think about whom else has the same problem and look at what they've done to solve it. I was sent eventually to a man named Jack Smith. He ran a program at another school called Special Art. I always love that name. What other kind of art is there? For people just like me, people who wanted to go to art school but couldn't get in. I would have to spend an extra year in high school if he would accept me. I spent that year with Jack Smith, and it was the most amazing year of my life. He taught me photography and full-color offset printing. He taught me ceramics and printmaking and typography. I was experiencing a taste of the life I had imagined at 12, and I fell in love. I did nothing else. I worked constantly. I took the bus to school at 7 a.m. and hitchhiked home the 30 miles after the school closed at 10 p.m. that night, every night. He gave me what I needed to get into art school and into the city. I'll never forget my first visit. I took the night bus and arrived for the first time early Sunday morning in the center of Toronto wearing a plaid lumberjack shirt and work boots. I was accepted to the Ontario College of Art, the only school I applied to. It would be a rough and short ride. I couldn't understand the rules and the bureaucracy and the culture of control. I thought I was supposed to be in an art school. It turned out I was in an art school. After 18 difficult months, I lost confidence in the school and was offered a job as a designer, which seemed pretty easy to me, even though I hadn't studied design. I left the college and became a designer. I discovered that the life of a designer is the life that I imagined. It is a life in a different place, a life against violence, a life of beauty and ideas and books and art, a way of being in the world. I became a designer, and I never wanted to go back to that place of violence. I was afraid that if I went back there, I might slide back into that valley of darkness. I left my life in the wilderness and became an urban dweller. I lived in cities and worked in a world of cities. I couldn't understand how my life on the farm in the forest could be relevant in any way to my city life. I started work in communication design, graphic design, at a time when communication, business, and life were being profoundly transformed. When I started work, people were still using hot metal type. Gutenberg technology was still used for the production of newspapers and other printed things. The photocopier was a new technology. FedEx was new. Fax was new. The computer had not yet been introduced to the workplace. The internet was still a military operation. No cell phones, no Facebook, no Google, no iPad, no apps. Imagine working without a computer and the internet. These technologies, along with many others, created a revolution of possibility. They destabilized the world and made it possible to live in Toronto and work in the world. They would foster a new world of information transparency where there is no longer back of house, no longer a separation between what we say and what we do. They would create a new context where everything we do is visible and always telling our story. Everything is communicating, whether we like it or not. In a context where everything communicates, everything must be designed. I set up a studio, and for 25 years, I worked with people and businesses and governments and institutions who asked me to design more and more of what they were doing. This expansion of my definition and practice of design happened organically. Clients and collaborators wanted to explore what would happen if I applied my way of design to the mandate of an institution, or the experience of a football stadium, or the strategy of a business school, or the vision for the future of a country. The definition of design and what it was capable of seemed to expand with every project. Over those 25 years, I was fortunate to work with absolutely extraordinary people. I had an idea early on that there was a very thin film or layer around the Earth with very, very few particles, very widely dispersed. Those particles were the people that I needed to work with. They were the people I was looking for, and they were looking for me. There was a man named Sanford Quinter in New York. He was the first to insist that what I was doing was authorship. There was a philosopher in Paris. There was an architect in Rotterdam, an economist in Japan, an architect in Los Angeles. But these people were very, very widely distributed. And I knew that in order to find them and for them to find me, I had to stay true to what I was doing. For those people to find me, I needed to put out a clear and pure signal. If I muddied the message, they would never find me. If there is one piece of advice in my talk today, this is it. Be true to your voice. Express your commitment. Be pure. Stay the course with clarity. Only by broadcasting your honest signal, telling the world who you are with truth and clarity, will the people you need be able to find you. Over time, I realized that in a world of constant change, I needed to know where the world was going in order to understand where the greatest opportunities would be and where I could make the greatest contribution. I began to do my own research and work to map out the shifting context. I began producing what I came to think of as context projects. Projects to explore and map the changing world around me and to define design and the way that I would practice. In that process of articulating the context, I became an author. When I made a project called Massive Change, I discovered something that would once again transform my work and life. I was asked by the Vancouver Art Gallery to do a major exhibition on the future of design. In my research, I found an extraordinary quote by a British historian named Arnold Toynbee. Toynbee had written a 20-volume history of the world, and after all that, declared that in the long sweep of history, the 20th century would not be known for either technology and innovation or violence and conflict. And remember, this is a quotation from 1957 in a Nobel lecture by Lester B. Pearson, who won the Peace Prize for inventing peacekeeping. So these two men in 1957 would have lived through the worst killing in human history, 70 million people dead. But they say, no, the 20th century, that's not the big idea for the 20th century. It will not be technology and innovation or violence and conflict. Instead, it will be remembered as an era in which we dared to imagine the welfare of the entire human race as a practical objective. And when Toynbee uses the term practical objective, he makes it a design project. It's not a utopian, unreachable vision. A practical objective is something we undertake. When I read that, I thought, wow, that is the biggest idea I've ever heard. That is the place of design I've been living. That is what every designer I know is committed to, even if they might not say it that way. I set up a design education prototype to produce the project. The Institute Without Boundaries was an experiment, a purpose-driven, entrepreneurial, experience-based design education experiment. We took a very tough challenge, an exhibition on the future of design, and did it in a very public context, and in doing so, accelerated entrepreneurial design learning. This idea of design as the method we would use to address the welfare of the whole human race as a practical objective was profoundly optimistic. But the mood of the day was quite gloomy, and I think it still is. Almost everyone I knew told me I was nuts, some of them quite directly to my face, especially older people. They said, we should have done that, but we didn't. Don't go there. The world is going to hell in a handcart, and design is driving it there. My own experience told me otherwise. I saw a movement all over the world of people committed to solving the problems we were facing. I saw people collaborating across boundaries of language and religion and nationality and discipline to design and develop solutions to problems that have vexed us in some cases since the beginning of time. Even though we have a grindingly negative media structurally focused on violence and conflict, The dominant story of our time is collaboration, optimism, and design. I want to be clear about that idea that I'm not saying people in the media are bad people. We have a media culture that is structurally organized around conflict. So no matter how good a person you are, the business is organized around conflict and violence. And that's where you're going to go. When in fact, the dominant story is what we're doing here today. I once told my wife that if we published a newspaper called Reality, it would be a mile thick. The first quarter inch is the New York Times, and it scares the hell out of you. The rest of the mile is massive change. Somehow the biggest movement in human history is not a story. It is as if the image of our goodness is so beautiful that we can't bear to look at it directly. We produced massive change, and in the process met a few hundred of the world's great innovators, designers solving the greatest challenges of our time. Massive Change opened in Vancouver to great success, and I thought we had nailed it. But I visited a high school in Vancouver, and a group of students told me they liked the idea, but I wasn't thinking big enough. I said, it's the welfare of all mankind. I mean, as a practical objective. What could be bigger than that? And they really blew my mind. They showed me a blind spot. They said, take out all mankind and replace it with all of life. That's our project, the welfare of all of life as a practical objective. And I was really knocked out because they were absolutely right. The 21st century, Toynbee was right about the 20th century. The welfare of all mankind as a practical objective. That is what we did. That is what we're committed to. And we succeeded. The reason we have the challenges that we face today is not because we failed. All the challenges we face today are challenges of success, not failure. But these students were right. That today, the 21st century, our project is the welfare of all of life as a practical objective. When Massive Change went to Chicago, my wife and I moved our family with it. I was given an honorary doctorate at the School of the Art Institute and became the Bill and Stephanie Sick Distinguished Professor and became a Distinguished Fellow at the Siegel Design Institute at the School of Engineering, Northwestern University. We began a process of setting up something like an Institute Without Boundaries in Chicago in the great tradition of Molinage's New Bauhaus and Stanley Tigerman's ArchiWorks. In the process of that work, I discovered something that is profoundly disorienting. That while we think most people go to college, that most people have this experience, if not this particular experience, even in America, 70% do not access this important experience. And that number drops to 1% when we include the rest of the world. We realized that we were going about this all wrong. We were facing the wrong direction. We had to turn around and think about how to bring the power and promise of design to the 99%. So almost 2 years ago, I fired myself. It was a really tough day because firing people is always a drag, and being fired is even worse, and doing them both in one day. I quit working with the Toronto studio I'd created and focused on designing design education. We set up the Massive Change Network, committed to taking the power of design to as many people as possible. We could see a vision for the future of design that was about leadership. We define design as leadership, and that is the power that you now hold. Having graduated from Harvard, you have the power to shape the world. You also have the responsibility. You have the power to envision a better future, visualize that destination, and inspire people to work with you to go there, and systematically work to realize that vision. That's the definition of leadership, and you have the most advanced methodology of leadership possible, design leadership. I hope that you will not confine your design leadership to the classical field of design, because the world needs you now in every field. The world needs your design leadership in business. Design will be the method by which we take business to sustainable practice. The world needs your design leadership in government. We must transform our systems and methods of governance, and design is the key to accomplish this. The world needs your design leadership in education. We are still using methods of education from the 19th century. I've dedicated myself to design education and overcoming the limitations of our current systems of higher education. I've dedicated myself to massive change. We're committed to designing low-cost access to the tools that you now have and providing access to the greatest number of people possible. And here is the absolutely audacious part. I know that to reach the 99% who have not had access to these extraordinary tools and methods, concepts and knowledge that you now have, we will need your expertise, your energy, your talent, your commitment. I ask you to join me in this ambition, and together we will change the world. Together we will allow people around the world to live a life in a different place, a different way of being in the world, a life against violence, a life of beauty and ideas and books and art. I'll end with one postscript. I've gone back to my hometown to work with the university there, Laurentian University, and I was thrilled to discover that the dead zone has been redesigned. It is now a recovering ecology, greener and healthier with each passing year. So here I am today, addressing the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University with only a high school education, or some college, as online surveys describe it. And that is why I'm thrilled to be here. Yes, I'm honored, but more importantly, I'm thrilled. Congratulations to the Harvard University Graduate School of Design, class of 2012. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I'm really thrilled. That's not easy to get, let me tell you. Thank you so much. I'm happy to answer questions if there are after that audacious thing. I'm also happy to have a drink.